Hey everyone, today's story is about a genius gambler who gets ISEKAI'D into another world and is forced to run a dungeon. But instead of building traps to kill people, he creates a casino that keeps them coming back. So with that said, let's begin the story. The protagonist opens his eyes wide, exhaling in confusion. Beads of sweat roll down his forehead. He stands in the middle of a cave, a blue sphere glowing before him. Looking around, the protagonist realizes he has no idea where he is. His eyes widen. He fears he has been buried alive. Madarame Takashi is a gambler, so he can imagine why they might have done this to him. A few days ago, on a job for the Yakuza, the protagonist placed a big bet and hit the jackpot. He managed to get 13 orphans, the strongest and most difficult combination, which yields the maximum points. The loan sharks Madarame beat lost a ton of money. However, as the protagonist sees it, they couldn't have buried him alive just for that. Besides, the protagonist's death wouldn't benefit the loan sharks in any way or return their lost funds. Madarame approaches the sphere, deciding to see what it is. A greeting addressed to the dungeon master then appears on the screen. The protagonist doesn't understand what's going on any better, but he assumes it's a game. Deciding that he is looking at a touchscreen, the protagonist touches the sphere. New text appears, creating dungeons, monsters, items, or objects. Madarame doesn't understand a thing, so he decides to take a shot in the dark and selects Create Dungeon. Then he notices figures and a little man who seems to represent him. A sphere is located next to the silhouette, and a dome is above them. The protagonist taps it and, holding his finger down, drags it upward. The dome on the screen bursts. A loud crash echoes above the protagonist's head. Looking up in shock, Madarame discovers that a hole has formed in the ceiling. As unbelievable as it sounds, this happened after the protagonist rotated the image. Recalling the inscriptions on the sphere, the protagonist realizes that he is being asked to build a dungeon. This doesn't really feel like a game anymore. However, the power seems to allow him to get out, so Madarame decides to play by the rules. He studies the map. Since the ceiling is about 2 meters high, it's 30 meters to the surface. The protagonist sees a mountain and a forest at its base. Something catches the protagonist's attention. He zooms in on the image and examines the town. Madarame notices a cart and concludes that civilization here is roughly at the level of the Middle Ages. Seeing little people on the map, the protagonist sighs with relief. At least there are people in this place. Madarame realizes that this is no longer his world. By all accounts, he has ended up in a fantasy world. If the inscriptions on the sphere are to be believed, the protagonist is the dungeon master here. It's not yet clear what that means in this world. The protagonist decides to first figure out what he's actually capable of. Madarame chooses to craft items. Various icons appear on the sphere. First and foremost, the protagonist decides to choose a sword. The protagonist studies the list of materials: copper, iron, steel, mithril, adamantite, and others. The lower the name is on the list, the higher the rarity and quality of the metal. Following this logic, the best option is orichalcum. Without hesitation, Madarame clicks on it. A message appears stating that he doesn't have enough funds for the purchase. It turns out that an orichalcum sword costs 100 million. There's nothing to be done, so the protagonist settles for the default iron blade, which costs 10 points. The protagonist can customize the weapon stats, shape, and even its magic. Madarame chooses the sword, and it falls right into his hands. The protagonist swings his sword with delight, realizing that in this world, no one has ever heard of the law of conservation of mass. But the protagonist thinks that now is not the time for that. Madarame studies the item menu and comes to some conclusions. Everyday items are cheaper, but things created from scratch are expensive. There are items that are nearly impossible to make. Cars, gasoline, and the entire petrochemical industry are exorbitantly expensive, while wood and iron cost next to nothing. It seems oil hasn't been harnessed in this world yet. The protagonist enjoys his food and water, which cost him a total of 2 points. The protagonist gazes thoughtfully at the sphere. The price difference for non-existent technologies serves as a sort of limiter. However, Madarame finds a loophole. Thin glass or perfectly white paper are inexpensive. It turns out that if an item exists in this world, technology and labor are ignored, and the price drops. The protagonist is pleased that he has discovered a loophole in the rules. The protagonist studies object creation. It turns out this involves crafting chests and traps. If you buy an item, subsequent purchases of copies of it will cost less. Madarame discovers that it's even possible to create magma or forest zones, but it comes at a corresponding cost. The protagonist realizes that everything in this world is bought with points and that he needs to spend them wisely if he doesn't want to go bankrupt. The protagonist moves on to monster creation. He immediately faces a problem. Even the cheapest dragon costs 50,000 points. That's half of Madarame's total points, and he can't afford such an expense right now. In monster creation, you can not only choose the species but also customize the parameters: stamina, agility, strength, magic, skin toughness, sharpness of fangs and claws, poisonous spines, poison sacs, and even fertility. It's clearly not easy to figure all this out. Just for fun, the protagonist chooses a rodent. He discovers that the stats are interconnected, which makes sense. High agility costs next to nothing for rodents, but strength and stamina require significant investment. For large animals, on the other hand, it's easier to boost strength, but much harder to boost agility. This makes sense, since it would be strange if a mouse could lift an elephant. The protagonist smiles, realizing that with enough points, he can do anything. Monsters can also be given skills, such as poisonous needles, fire breath, intelligence, and lightning. Madarame discovers the ability Battle Spirit, yellow. The brighter the color, from yellow to red, the stronger the creature. However, there are limitations here as well, so that an invincible monster cannot be created right away. The protagonist decides to give a try. He's nervous and hopes that monsters don't have the ability to kill their owner. Just in case, the protagonist plans to create the weakest possible creature for his first attempt. A minimalist round body, completely covered in fur, with legs as thin as wire and all stats at rock bottom. Such a monster, even if it wanted to, wouldn't be able to kill Madarame. The creation cost came to 1 point. The protagonist decides that later, if necessary, he'll boost the monster stats. Besides, if such a monster dies, nothing terrible will happen. A message appears before the protagonist. It turns out that upon first creation, you can give the monster the X intelligence skill. Madarame pauses to think. Weak monsters have almost no intelligence. A lion has a level of about 4, with a maximum of X. Starting from level 4, creatures can speak. The protagonist decides that making himself something like a starting companion isn't a bad idea at all. Otherwise, it's pretty tough without any hints. The protagonist realizes that whoever sent him to this world really wants him to build a dungeon. Madarame decides to play along with this unknown entity and creates an intelligent monster for himself. A woolly ball on thin legs appears before the protagonist. It's capable of moving, though not very successfully. After taking a couple of steps, the creature stumbles and falls to the floor. Crouching down in front of his monster and looking at it skeptically, the protagonist asks if it can speak. It answers in the affirmative and thanks him for creating it. Madarame introduces himself and asks if the monster has a name. Upon learning that it doesn't, the protagonist names the creature Karma. Karma thanks him for the wonderful name. The protagonist apologizes and asks to get straight to the point, inquiring who the dungeon master is. Karma explains that he is the one who guards the sphere, that is, the core of the dungeon, which attracts people from outside, injures them, or kills them. The master must collect the mana emanating from the bodies and use it to expand and improve the dungeon. Words about killing swirl in Madarame's head. He asks, "What is mana?" Karma explains that it is the energy inherent in all living beings. The core gathers it and converts it into points. The protagonist wonders, what is the point of all this? And who even came up with the idea of dungeon masters? Karma admits that he doesn't know, but he adds that there is an ultimate goal, to accumulate 100 billion points. The first master to reach that total becomes the ruler of the world. The protagonist remarks that this sounds tempting. Smiling, he repeats the part about 100 billion points. To start with, Madarame, following Karma's advice, expanded the space, installed lighting, and added wallpaper, chairs, and a table. The place now resembles a room. Taking a seat and placing the monster in front of him, the protagonist asks how he can earn the required amount. Karma explains that there are 3 ways. The first, already known to the protagonist, is killing people. It's best to hunt the strong, because the more trained a person is, the more mana they have. This system reminds Madarame of gaining experience in games. However, it's not that simple. Adventurers come to destroy the core, and if it falls, both the dungeon and the master will perish. The protagonist realizes that it's a matter of balance. A strong adventurer means more points, but also a higher risk. Karma moves on to the second method, absorbing the mana of the plants and animals around him. However, this option yields only about 10 points a day. The third method is to take mana from people without killing them. Humans have a lot of this energy. An average adventurer, after spending an hour in the dungeon, will yield about 10 points. The protagonist wonders how much killing would yield and learns it's 10,000. His expression changes as he realizes that's 1,000 times more than spending time in the dungeon. However, Madarame realizes that this would mean he'd have to kill 10 million people to earn 100 billion points. He says this is impossible since the population in these lands is clearly smaller than that number. Kirima agrees with him. The protagonist asks what would happen if they captured people and held them captive. His assistant replies that this would be ineffective. After all, mana is the energy of life. The stronger the emotions, the greater the release of it. Dungeon adventures yield the best mana. Torture works too. The protagonist interrupts Kirima at this point, saying he doesn't want that. The monster agrees with him and adds that such dungeons are quickly destroyed. Kirima states that creating impassable dungeons is forbidden. Madarame asks why. After all, there are plenty of ways to do it. Traps, monsters, isolating the core, gassing. Kirima replies that, according to the rules, a dungeon must be passable. The protagonist asks again. Kirima explains that the rules are a set of mandatory laws for creating a dungeon. The protagonist indignantly remarks that this is nonsense and asks who even came up with this. Kirima replies that he doesn't know. Madarame asks him to explain the rules in that case. Kirima begins. The entrance must be connected to the core by a corridor. The protagonist suggests making the passage very narrow, but it turns out that the regulations stipulate that the height and width cannot be less than 2 meters. If a lock is installed, the key must be kept in a chest on the same floor. The protagonist suggests creating an unbreakable code. However, Kirima shakes his head, and he explains that the puzzle must be solvable. 6 out of 10 people should be able to solve it. Leaning back exhausted in his chair, Madarame says that with rules like that, he's definitely doomed. Kirima adds that even the traps have their areas specified. The protagonist notes that there are a whole bunch of restrictions and asks if there's any way to get around them. His companion explains that if an object is set up, it must follow these laws. The protagonist surmises that they decided to nip obvious ideas in the bud right from the start. However, he is certain that if there are loopholes in the creation of objects, then there must be some here as well. Madarame asks him to tell him about the monsters. Kirima warns that placing them requires special attention. After all, monsters think and act independently. They are hostile toward humans and attack them on their own. However, if the monsters have low intelligence, they may wander off somewhere or roam the dungeon. The protagonist grumbles that a monster that escapes is a loss. Kirima says that in this case, locked doors sometimes help. He adds that monsters can also fall into traps. If placing traps nearby, you should choose monsters that won't fall into them or take damage. For example, a slime above a pit with spikes. Experienced adventurers choose traps based on monster types. If there are many flying creatures, you should watch your step more carefully, and so on. Finally, the most difficult part of keeping monsters is providing them with enough food and water. This news does not please the protagonist at all. Kirima explains that hunger is the main reason monsters escape. He continues his story. Some monsters are highly fertile. The weak ones are capable of reproducing on their own. These species are usually used as feed. The strong ones, however, have low fertility. It dawns on Madarame that keeping monsters will require creating an entire ecosystem. He wonders if all masters really go to such lengths. Throwing his hands up, Kirima asks him to leave this matter to him. The protagonist asks about skeletons and zombies, which don't need food. Kirima explains that skeletons are cheap and eventually resurrect at, but he wouldn't recommend using them, unless it's just a couple that won't get in the way. The protagonist raises his eyebrows in surprise, and he summons one of the monsters. It turns out that skeletons have only one type of attack, which Madarame hadn't considered. They have simple actions, just like golems and puppets. Skeletons can be trained, but it'll take a ton of time. And they're full of weaknesses, from holy water and exorcism by priests to the simplest trap, a rope stretched out under their feet. Pointing at a skeleton, the protagonist asks, "What's the point of this anyway?" Kirima announces that a master can control such monsters directly. However, noticing the protagonist's excitement, he adds that one shouldn't expect much from skeletons. Madarame notes that adventurers are constantly raiding the dungeon and asks how many such places remain unexplored after the first year. Looking away, Kirima replies that perhaps around 30%. The protagonist repeats the number gloomily. Here, the protagonist recalls something and asks if there's a town nearby. Kirima says that a fortified town called Roadlock, located at, is an hour's walk to the west. It has a population of about 70,000. This city is the commercial hub of the entire region. Madarame pauses to think. He thought there were fewer people in Roadlock. Since there's trade, that means there's money in the city and goods are being transported. And where there are caravans, there are bandits and guards. It turns out there must be plenty of adventurers in Roadlock. The protagonist grunts thoughtfully. Meanwhile, a group of adventurers is traveling down the road. The girl turns around abruptly. Her companion, named Kaido, calls out to the adventurer, addressing her as Melinda. She points to the mountain and says she sensed a strange surge of mana coming from there. The guy turns to the two girls named Treff and Seal and asks what they think. They just shrug. A burly guy, slinging an axe over his shoulder, suggests they head home. The girl stops him, calling him Gantz, and reminds him that Melinda's intuition is often spot on. Kaido suggests walking to the foot of the mountain, and if they don't find anything, heading back home. Gantz reluctantly agrees. The group approaches the base and discovers a passage. The adventurers realize that Melinda was right. Kaido asks if the girl sensed anything in this spot when they passed through here 2 days ago. Melinda hesitantly replies that she didn't. Kaido realizes that something unknown appeared either yesterday or today. He notices that some strange force seems to be beckoning him to enter this dungeon. Kaido announces that he's going to open the door now and flings it open. His eyes widen, and he cries out in surprise, not understanding what kind of place this is. A little earlier, Madarame realized that this was a hopeless situation. A normal dungeon would be cleared in an instant. Smiling, the protagonist decides that the adventurers will go through something else. Karama asks, "What exactly?" The protagonist lets out a short chuckle and replies that it will be a casino dungeon. Just at that moment, the group of adventurers freezes at the entrance to the hall, their mouths agape. Kaido enters the guild building. He reports what happened to the deputy guild master, Ms. Pollitt. She wearily adjusts her glasses, complaining that problems are cropping up again in the guildmaster's absence. She wonders if a casino can even be called a dungeon. After all, there are neither traps nor monsters there. Kaido is absolutely certain of his conclusion. He recalls how he and the squad explored the mysterious place. Melinda asked uncertainly, "Are you sure this is a dungeon?" Asel remarked admiringly that it looked more like a palace. Gantz discovered that the objects he had mistaken for boxes turn out to be slot machines. The adventurer has no idea what that means. Kaido asks his companions to be careful, because all of this could turn out to be a trap. He instructed Asel to check the ordinary traps and Melinda to check the magical ones. Both girls set about carrying out the order. Seal, pressing her hand to her mouth, warned that there was a chest standing outside the door. Attached to it was a sign stating that, in honor of the grand opening, new visitors would receive 10 coins as a gift. After receiving permission, Gantz opened the chest and spat out in disappointment. The coins inside turned out not to be gold. Kaido guessed that these were needed to proceed. Treff asked where they should start looking, and Kaido pointed to the door marked with a moon and a star. He decided that it led to the next floor. Gantz pushed against the door, but it wouldn't budge. Asel noted that this was a classic dungeon mechanism. Kaido explained that they needed to insert something into the holes. Treff agreed that since even Gantz's strength hadn't helped, pushing was pointless. Just then, Melinda called out to the others, having discovered another chest. There was nothing inside except for an inscription on the bottom. Treff read it aloud, and it turned out that to get a prize, you had to whisper your desired reward and insert the required number of coins. Most likely the very same ones the squad had found earlier. Melinda pointed to the stone slab. The prices were listed there. The symbol of the sun, like that of the moon, cost 100,000 coins. The group realized that this was the key to the door. Kaido decided to test how the chest worked. He placed 10 coins, as required, and asked for a weak potion. Opening the chest again, Kaido took out the requested vial, and he asked Treff to identify the elixir. The girl placed a bottle in her palm and reached for the pendant around her neck with her other hand. The adventurer had a second-class analyzer skill, and she used Identify. Treff announced that the potion was genuine. Kaido realized that for 200,000 coins, the door could indeed be opened. Asel discovered a currency exchange box. Above, it were the terms for exchanging money into coins. Melinda remarked indignantly that this was a rip-off. 1 silver coin worth 1,000 kraka was exchanged for only 10 tokens. It turned out that just to get to the next floor would require a whopping 20 million kraka. Treff noted that in Roadlock, you can live for a month on 100,000 to 150,000 kraka. It turns out that a single floor of the dungeon costs as much as an entire house. Treff added that, at the same time, a weak potion that cost 1,000 kraka was being sold at nearly market price. Kaido agreed, recalling that in the city, it cost between 900 and 1,000 kraka. Thinking it over, he noted that the more expensive the item, the more profitable the exchange. For example, a strong potion usually costs 110,000 kraka, but here it's 100,000. Kaido suggested they search the room more thoroughly. Maybe there were more coins hidden there. The team carefully searched the room, but found nothing. It seems there's only one option left, the slot machines. Melinda saw images of berries and fruits. Gantz noticed the coin slot, and Kaido decided to try one. There was a clinking sound, and the images began to change. A puzzled Gantz asked anxiously if it was safe. Kaido suggested they pull the lever. Melinda pointed to a button, but the adventurer snapped back, saying that they still didn't know if it was safe at all. The images gradually came to a stop. All three turned out to be cherries. 3 coins fell out of the slot. Melinda stared at it in confusion, but then Kaido joyfully announced that he understood everything. The mysterious machine multiplies the coins. He handed out tokens to everyone so they could try it too. The others didn't share his enthusiasm. According to Kaido's logic, this was a waste of money, and they weren't putting anything into it. Soon, Gantz and the squad leader were fretting over the result, while the others watched. Melinda with disapproval, and Isel with curiosity. Kaido concludes his report, agreeing with Pollitt. The dungeon is strange. However, he adds that it is also fascinating. This last point catches the deputy's attention. She remarks aloud that if Kaido is right, this is an unprecedented case. However, it turns out that since there are no monsters, the dungeon is safe. Kaido's eyes light up, and he argues passionately. The adventurer presents a slew of arguments. Clearing it will require a lot of time and people, and the dungeon itself is right next to the city. Pollitt says that her uncle, the guild master, will surely want details. She adds that she won't cut him any slack just because they're related, and Kaido hastily replies that he wasn't counting on that anyway. After a moment's silence, Pollitt decides that an investigation is necessary. She'll request security and a guide, and the next morning, Kaido will lead her and 4 other investigators into the dungeon. Momentarily lost for words, the boy asks in surprise, "Is the deputy herself going too?" Pollitt replies that they don't have enough people. Meanwhile, on the lowest floor, Madarame watches the group studying the slot machines. Karima says he didn't even know it was possible to create a casino dungeon. The protagonist chimes in, noting that it's fun. His companion replies that they're in the red. The protagonist calmly explains that it's because of the sign-up bonus and that next time they'll come out ahead. Karima asks, anxiously, what if strong adventurers show up? Madarame replies that that's exactly what he's counting on. He needs to lure the strong ones in and collect their mana. The protagonist says that usually a group of strong adventurers threatens to take over the dungeon, but not in their case. Karima cheers. The protagonist adds that there are almost no points left, and it's time to open the next zone. Kaido leads the group, with Pollitt at the head, into the dungeon. The deputy adjusts her glasses and notes that it really is one continuous anomaly. She asks the guards to be on their guard, even though no monsters are in sight. Kaido tries his hardest to push away thoughts of the alluring slot machines. Melinda notices with surprise that there are now 50 coins in the chest instead of 60. Treff reminds them that these are only for new players, that is, the 4 explorers and Pollitt. Gantz remarks disappointedly that he had been counting on playing today as well. Kaido nudges him, saying they can exchange them. Melinda glares at them. Pollitt studies the table, noting the large number of empty rows. She finds the condition of opening the door for 200,000 coins unthinkable. Kaido asks how long it will take. The deputy admits that she thinks this door will never be opened. The coins can't be exchanged back, but they can be used to buy goods. 200,000 is 20 million kraka. Melinda says dreamily that with that kind of money, she'd give up on adventures. Kaido cheerfully remarks that if they decide to go through the dungeon, it'll be at the guild's expense. Pollitt brushes off the idea, cutting the adventure off. She decides to check out the slot machines, and Kaido volunteers to demonstrate how they work. After observing the adventurer's reactions to the slot machine, the deputy stops him, saying that's enough. Pollitt notices that the higher the bet, the bigger the payout. Gantz confirms her guess, pointing to a slot machine and saying that you can win 10 coins at once here. He shows off a small bag of money, his winnings. Pollitt assumes that the size of the winnings depends on the bet. Kaido recalls that there weren't any slot machines like this last time. Just then, Treff calls out to him. She points to a passageway, saying it wasn't there yesterday. The entire squad approaches the new corridor. Isel checks the map, confirming that the passage wasn't there before. Kaido advises them to be on guard, as the new corridor might hide traps. He asks Isel to update the map. The squad moves slowly down the corridor. Gantz stops at a door with a sign and asks if it's the restroom. Kaido decides to check it out. Behind the door, to the adventurer's amazement, lies a spacious, gleaming room with a fountain in the middle. Melinda remarks admiringly that she has never seen such clean restrooms before. Gantz admits that he wouldn't mind having a bite to eat here. Melinda pulls Kaido over, pointing out that there's a women's restroom as well. He makes sure there are no monsters anywhere. Then Gantz, his voice trembling with excitement, calls Kaido into yet another new room. Kaido grabs his head, fearing there might be monsters in there. Gantz shows the astonished Kaido that there is hot water in the room. Security begins checking the room for traps. Pollitt wearily puts his hand to his forehead, unable to imagine how to describe all this in a report. Kaido laughs awkwardly and remarks that they still need to figure out if they can actually use any of this. The deputy replies that it's at their own risk, since it's all too strange. Melinda immediately starts begging Pollitt to try out the bathtub. Kaido quickly points out that it's dangerous, but the girl brushes it off, noting that that's exactly why they came. She really wants to try it. To Kaido's surprise, Pollitt agrees. The adventurous girls are happy with her answer and want to check out the bath too. Kaido notes their solidarity with a smile. Gantz offers his services as a bodyguard. Kaido quickly takes him aside, asking if the adventurer values his life. The guard calls out to Pollitt. He reports that there's a strange box in a locker room. The squad examines the chest. You can get soap in exchange for coins. 1 coin gets you a small bar, 5 coins a medium bar, and 10 coins a large bar. The adventuress wants to try it and asks Kaido for money. The bar is very small, but smells great. Melinda asks Kaido for more coins and buys a bar of soap for 5 coins. The adventurers compare the sizes of the bars, and it turns out that the medium-sized one is the best deal. Pollitt decides to try the one for 10 coins, and she takes Kaido's remaining coins, much to his chagrin. In addition to the 10-coin bar of soap, there's also a small bottle in the chest. The label says it's hair oil. Melinda asks the deputy to open it. The adventurers examine the bottle with admiration. It's an oil produced in southern countries. Pollitt had already smelled this scent on items from the royal court. The girls want to exchange their coins and buy more. Treff is shocked to discover that this royal-class product costs 10 coins. Kaido offers to buy the entire stock at that price. The adventurers are disappointed to find that the stock has run out, and they want to buy more when it becomes available again. Pollitt kicks the male half of the group out, and the girls climb into the pool. The adventurers bask happily in the warm water. Asel glances admiringly at the deputy's figure. Meanwhile, the male adventurers are glued to the slot machines. Gantz just can't stop thinking about the girls bathing right now. Kaido warns that his companion is about to lose it all. Kaido doesn't understand what the girls find so appealing about scented oils, baths, and all that sort of thing. Although thanks to their bath, Kaido has time to play properly. With a toss of her hair, Melinda calls out to the adventurer. The flushed girl, holding a popsicle, announces that they're back. Kaido glances at her and quickly turns back to the arcade machine. He merely remarks that they were gone for a long time and asks where Pollitt is. Melinda replies that the deputy is talking with Seal and the others. Kaido asks if the girl enjoyed her bath. She admits she did. It was her first time bathing in such a large tub and with such fragrant soaps and oils. Melinda suggests taking a look at her hair. Blushing, Kaido says it's beautiful. The girl blushes and laughs shyly. The adventurer turns toward the vending machine. The images line up in a row. Melinda excitedly notes that they match, which means a win. Kaido realizes with surprise that these are images of an angel. The pay table doesn't specify how many coins this symbol is worth, and nothing comes out of the machine anyway. The adventurer decides, disappointed, that he has lost. Just then, the slot machine starts ringing. Melinda asks anxiously, "What does this mean?" But Kaido himself doesn't know. Then rows of symbols line up one after another. Cherries, bells, and watermelons. A whole pile of coins spills out of the machine. Melinda cries out in delight, grabbing Kaido by the shoulders. He's never had a winning streak like this before. He decides that the angel symbol was a sign. Kaido covers his mouth with his fist, hiding a smile. He finds playing slot machines incredibly fun. The sun is already setting when the squad leaves the dungeon. Gantz, clutching his head in disappointment, announces that he's in the red this time. Kaido replies that it's his own fault for betting 10 coins. Pollitt suggests exchanging the coins for prizes to investigate, and everyone agrees. Kaido examines the goods and prices and spots some hair oil for 300 coins. With that money, they could have a nice meal and buy new gear, but the adventurer has already made up his mind. Kaido hands Melinda the bottle. She accepts the gift shyly and remarks that the oil is very expensive. Kaido replies that nothing else caught his eye. The girl stammers a thank you. The couple stands there, embarrassed. Meanwhile, Madarame smiles contentedly. He says they've been a complete success. Karama throws his hands up in triumph, announcing that they've made a huge profit and congratulates the protagonist. The monster praises the idea of selling hair oil. Such items are hard to come by in Roadlock, and thanks to the dungeon's core, there's no need to pay for shipping. Karama adds that Fever Time has also caught on with the visitors. The protagonist reminds everyone that he said so all along and admits that he's gotten hooked on it himself. The monster says that another idea turned out to be the best one. Madarame adds to this, announcing that it's the bathhouse. Karama says he didn't expect women to like it so much. The protagonist replies that he had anticipated this outcome, but reality exceeded his expectations. He adds that word of mouth will bring even more visitors to the dungeon. The protagonist hoists Karama onto his shoulder and decides that, for now, they should maintain the current setup, and once they've accumulated enough points, make another upgrade. Meanwhile, the adventurers are looking at flyers in town. The brochures state that the dungeon casino will soon be renovated. Monitors cover the entire wall. Holding his head, Madarame wearily studies the instructions. Crawling under the table, the protagonist asks Karama, "How are the monitors looking?" This one says that the connection between the third and fifth pins is faulty. The main character doesn't understand what's going on. He stares at the manual again. Karama tells him to take a break and suggests he figure it out on his own. He smiles wearily and replies that he'd love to, but they're already behind schedule. There are only a few days left until the dungeon update, and they have to make it happen no matter what. Madarame didn't want to rush the upgrade at first, but luckily, they've had more visitors than he expected, and they're already at capacity. All the slot machines are occupied. Mile-long lines are forming at the exchange counters. This could lead to rumors that the dungeon is uncomfortable, and then everything will be lost. Apologizing, the protagonist asks Karama to hurry up. Karama jumps to work, enthusiastically declaring that helping the master is his primary duty. The protagonist smiles, noting that this sounds reassuring. Kaido hurries down the road. Melinda can barely keep up with him. She calls out to the guy, asking him to slow down a bit. He turns around and apologizes sheepishly. Melinda points out that the dungeon isn't going anywhere, so there's no need to rush. With a forced smile, Kaido replies that it might just disappear, and he picks up the pace again. Melinda sighs in exasperation. Kaido ponders the update. He decides that this is the very phase of change. Rumor has it that dungeons are alive. New corridors and rooms gradually appear within them. Sometimes even the floors can switch places. Adventurers call such periods the phase of change. Kaido stops abruptly at the threshold. Gantz asks if there have been any changes in the dungeon. Kaido replies that he can see it all for himself. The dungeon's layout has completely changed. The adventurers take a closer look. Asel admits that it's impressive. It's as if the squad had never been here. Treff adds that the building is growing rapidly and has already reached the size of an average dungeon. Kaido suggests they go inside. The adventurers grip their weapons tighter and begin descending the stairs. It's unclear what changes the phase will bring. Kaido prays that there won't be any silly alterations. Everyone already likes the slot machines and the bathhouse just the way they are. They descend. The adventurers freeze. Melinda spots the monsters. Skeletons stand frozen on either side of the passage. The party stares intently at them. Kaido realizes that monsters have now appeared in this dungeon as well. Kaido orders everyone to form a battle line. He pushes his way through the bewildered squad. Melinda calls out to him in confusion. Kaido lunges at the skeleton with his sword raised. With a swing of his weapon, the boy cuts the monster in half. Melinda notices that Kaido has already dealt with the first skeleton and decides to take on the second one. Gripping her staff tighter, the girl summons second-level fire magic, and she uses a spell called Fire Arrow. The monster turns black and crumbles to ashes. Treff reminds them that skeletons resurrect after ordinary attacks. The girl suggests finishing them off with anti-magic, but Kaido stops her. He didn't sense any hostile intentions from the skeleton. The adventurer suggests bringing the monsters back to life and observing their behavior. The skeleton bows, much to the adventurer's surprise. Kaido realizes that the monsters really aren't going to attack. Gantz asks what they're going to do with the skeletons. Kaido replies that it's still too early to consider the monsters friendly, but it's time for the adventurers to move on. The group continues on their way. Seal notes how much everything has changed. Treff adds that the space has quadrupled in size. Gantz is thrilled to see that there are more slot machines, which means there won't be any lines now. Melinda sees more skeletons at the tables. Kaido suggests that they'll be playing with these ones. Asel calls out to Melinda and points out a skeleton cleaning up the room. The adventurers notice a tavern and a newly built restaurant that haven't opened yet. The prize exchange has also changed. The chests have disappeared, and skeletons behind bars have appeared in their place. Gantz points out that this way, the monsters won't attack them. However, Kaido replies that that's not the point. Treff explains to a confused Gantz that now the prizes are displayed in plain sight, whereas before they were hidden in chests. Kaido adds that this isn't to protect visitors from monsters, but to protect the monsters from them. Gantz is still not convinced. Melinda impatiently cuts off the chatter and urges everyone to go swimming. There are more restrooms now, and the bathing area has quadrupled in size. There are even spots where the foam is gushing at full force. Melinda decides she absolutely has to tell Pollitt about this. The hot room with thick steam stands out the most. Kaido recoils, noting how hot it is inside. Asel guesses that it's a sauna. He explains that there are similar facilities up north. You have to go inside and really work up a sweat. Kaido replies that it sounds like torture, A cell adds that afterward, you need to jump into cold water and relax. Kaido isn't convinced. A relaxation area has also appeared in the corridor with the baths. Treff points to a chest for exchanging prizes. Seal notices that you can only get ice cream and drinks here. But that's not all that's changed. Gant spots a passageway. The sign states that a triple room for one night costs 50 coins. You have to pay to get the key. Kaido realizes with surprise that this is a hotel. Melinda remarks that this is an incredible phase of change. Her companion admits that he's never seen anything on this scale before. He suggests they check out the room for the report. Kaido and the others look around the room, noting that it's a bit cramped. Gant adds that he expected more. Seal adds that in the dungeons they had to sleep on cold stones, but this is the first time she's seen anything like this. Kaido muses that this could serve as a temporary base. Melinda asks gloomily if he plans to spend the next few days playing slot machines. He hastily points out that it's faster to get to the bloody dungeon from the casino. If it takes 4 hours round trip from Roadlock, it takes half that time from here. That way, we can focus on the raids. Melinda agrees, though skeptically. Kaido adds that while the rooms are a bit cramped, they're cheap, just 5,000 kraka for the three of us. Treff agrees, saying that prices have gone up in Roadlock, and even the shabbiest flophouse charges 3,000 per person. Kaido notes that as strange as it may sound, a hotel in the dungeon might actually be safer than any other. Melinda agrees, acknowledging that things often get stolen in cheap places. Kaido thinks people are the scariest of all. He announces that the inspection is almost over. There's only one place left, the table with the skeleton. Kaido volunteers to check it out. Melinda stops him, saying she'll go with him, since it could be a trap designed to split up the adventurers. The skeleton greets the adventurers. It explains that it's a blackjack table and invites them to play. Treff remarks in shock that the monster is talking. Kaido agrees to play. He admits he doesn't know the rules, and the skeleton replies that in that case, they'll start without any bets. The monster shows off the deck, and Kaido says that Roadlock has similar cards. The skeleton explains that in this game, he is the dealer, and the adventurers are competing against him. The monster explains the rules. Kaido realizes it's simple. The goal is to get 21 points. He agrees to try playing for stakes. The skeleton deals the cards. Kaido realizes he has a 2 and a face card worth 10, for a total of 12 points. He won't go bust unless he draws a 10 or another face card. The monster deals him a 6. Now Kaido has a total of 18 points, and he decides to stand. The skeleton has 12, and he needs to take more cards, since he has less than 17. He draws a king. The monster ends up with 22, which is a bust, so he loses. Melinda happily realizes that Kaido has won. The skeleton congratulates the bewildered adventurer and applauds him. The monster says he'd be happy to see Kaido again, and Kaido waves goodbye to him. Gantz asks how it went. Kaido replies that it couldn't have gone any safer, though he has no idea how to explain it to the guildmaster. Inside the guild building, the head of the guild yells at Kaido at the top of his lungs. He doesn't believe in friendly skeletons or a hotel that appeared out of nowhere. The adventurer, covering his face with his hands, swears to his uncle that he isn't making any of this up. He immediately corrects himself, addressing his relative as Guildmaster Jiren. The latter, folding his arms, looks at his nephew with suspicion. Stepping away from the table, Jiren grumbles that it's bad enough that all the young people hang out at the casino for hours on end. Rumors about the hair oil have even spread to other cities. At a recent auction, 10 gold coins were paid for it. Kaido knows that the market price for it doesn't exceed 4, and wonders if that's too much for a product. Even if it is high quality, Jiren looks out the window and replies that merchants have turned the oil into a speculative commodity. Every resale only drives up the price, and disaster is just around the corner. Kaido adds that people are talking about the baths too, and ordinary residents will soon be clamoring to go there themselves. Jiren says with annoyance that without dangerous monsters, the dungeon can't be closed off to the public. However, the guildmaster decides that things cannot be left as they are. Even if the monsters aren't aggressive, they've still appeared. Besides, a dungeon is a dungeon. After a moment's pause, Kaido asks if Jiren means a cleanup operation. The guildmaster, losing his temper, slams his fist on the table, replying that it's not that simple. Yesterday, some relative showed up, a 42nd cousin of some lord, looking for hair oil. If they close the dungeon, merchants and ordinary people will devour the guild whole. Kaido nervously realizes that his uncle has it tough. However, the adventurer knows that if he wants to continue enjoying the casino, he can't let the problem run its course. After thinking it over, Kaido suggests posting guards in the dungeon. Jiren, turning sharply, asks for clarification. His nephew explains that they can hire adventurers and task them with guarding the dungeon. The guildmaster asks where the money will come from. After all, no one will work for free. Kaido thoughtfully suggests monopolizing the hair oil market. raise the price, and spend the difference on security. After a pause, Jiren asks how they'll keep the merchants quiet. Kaido reminds him that anything that happens in the dungeon isn't considered a crime, so they can silence the particularly talkative ones with a little scolding. The guildmaster replies that this is according to the laws of the kingdom. Kaido passionately retorts that the dungeon is adventurers' territory, and merchants have no business meddling there. Besides, it would be to their advantage as well if the guild sold at a fixed price. And for the nobility, you can set aside a vial of oil just in case. Jiren snorts, and Kaido hastily adds that he believes violence is wrong. With a wave of his hand, the guildmaster stops him and admits that it's not a bad idea. He tells his flustered nephew that, as an adventurer, he's certainly nothing to write home about. But perhaps he has a talent for trade. Meanwhile, Madarame and his loyal assistant are sitting in front of their monitors. Karima happily reports that the update was successful. The protagonist agrees, admitting that a weight has been lifted from his heart. Although, of course, he hadn't expected a permanent security detail that would require setting up a guard post. But the protagonist is more interested in why so many long-term guests have appeared at the hotel. Karima explains that there's a mid-level dungeon an hour's journey from the casino, and the adventurers seem to be using the rooms there as a base. Madarame replies in surprise that he thought they just wanted to play the slot machines for a while longer. The protagonist adds that popularity is a good thing, but they've run into a problem. He glances at the monitor, which shows a mountain of silver coins. Karima asks in confusion if the problem has to do with the amount of this. The protagonist explains that money needs to be in circulation all the time, and he has nowhere to put it. If he keeps hoarding it, a shortage will begin in the human world, and this could cause currency exchange rates to go haywire. That would be bad for the casino, since their coins are pegged to silver. Raising his finger instructively, Madarame says that a small imbalance in the economy quickly turns into an uncontrollable flood. Karima agrees, and he asks, how can we get the money circulating? The pensive protagonist notes that if they allow coins to be exchanged for silver and gold, the audience might change. With his eyes wide open, the protagonist decides to set up a claw machine. Karima says nothing. On the way, cursing Jiren in every way possible, a former adventurer nicknamed Steadfast Nagarara trudges along. He can't believe they've put him in charge of guarding the dungeon. He is infuriated by the fact that he, Nagarara himself, has been entrusted with such a ridiculous task. The weary group of adventurers heads into the dungeon. Estelle, stretching, admits that she can't wait to dive into the warm water. Melinda notices that the casino is getting more and more crowded every day. Just then, someone calls out to Kaido. Turning to the security guard, the adventurer recognizes Dan and remarks that working in security suits him well. Melinda says she's going to take a bath first, and Kaido waves her off. He asks Dan if there are any problems in the basement. Dan replies that the job is a piece of cake, and he can even stop by the casino after his shift. Dan explains that for some reason, the dungeon decided to set up a security post. There's furniture there, and skeletons do the cleaning. Kaido admits he's even a little jealous. Dan asks if the adventurer will be spending the night at the casino. Kaido replies that this time he'll return to Roadlock, since he can't stay in the dungeon all the time. The adventurer adds that while the girls are in the bath, he'll be hanging out at the slot machines. Dan teases that real men play blackjack. Snorting, Kaido replies that such entertainment is everywhere, but slot machines are only found in the dungeon. The guard sneers that the adventurer simply doesn't know how to think. The men exchange glances. Dan notes that the hottest game right now is Money Hand. Kaido admits that this is on a whole different level. Money Hand is a game featuring a low-level monster called the Clay Hand, which grabs coins. One attempt costs 10 silver coins, or 10,000 kraka. You can only play once a day. Dan asks if Kaido has tried Money Hand yet. Kaido replies that he played it before leaving. Dan admits that only a master of the local dungeon could have come up with something like this using a lousy monster. Kaido asks if the guard took out the black coin. Dan looks at him silently. Then he admits that if he had done so, he wouldn't still be stuck at work. In the transparent box lie gold and silver coins. However, among them are some strange ones: red, green, and yellow. These are winning coins that grant a second chance. And among them, there's only one black one. It's the jackpot, meaning you can take everything in the box. Dan excitedly says that's everyone's dream. He mentions that there will soon be a special tournament, and the prize pool will be increased. Dan has even seen the flyers. Kaido is pleased by the news. The conversation between the adventurer and the security guard is interrupted by someone's indignant shout. A visitor playing blackjack claims it's a scam. He claims that the skeleton has swapped the cards and demands his money back. Kaido and Dan repeat the word cheating in unison, sounding skeptical. The casino is set up so that customers win if they play in small amounts, but this visitor simply decided to go for the jackpot. The player, cursing the skeleton, cuts it down with his sword. Kaido sends Dan to stop the enraged adventurer. The guard doesn't understand why the visitor suddenly flew into a rage. Adventurers are forbidden from killing the local monsters without a reason. Kaido suggests writing down the visitor's name and reporting what happened to the guildmaster at. Adventurers have been warned not to cause trouble. Dan remarks that only a fool would think they could live peacefully in Roadlock after disobeying the guildmaster. Madarame leans back in his chair and says with satisfaction that the crane game is a huge hit, and at this rate, the tournament will be a smash hit too. Karama points out that in this game, they can rig the odds themselves. The protagonist agrees. Right now, the slot machines are set up to pay out more often. According to probability theory, about every 300th player should hit the jackpot. Those who witness this one will come to the casino every day. The protagonist asks how many skeletons they've defeated today. Karama replies that none so far, and in general, fewer and fewer monsters are being defeated each time. Madarame is pleased, because the fewer conflicts, the calmer it is. Karama adds that security quickly removes all troublemakers. The protagonist announces that it's time to move on to the next step. Karama asks for clarification and explains that no one has ever done this before. Madarame replies that being the first is also worthy. The monster asks who they'll choose as intermediaries. Glancing at the monitor, the protagonist points to Kaido. Meanwhile, Jiren asks skeptically if it's true that the dungeon is sending a request to the guild. Kaido shows the uncle an envelope. He explains that he spent the night at a hotel. The skeleton told the adventurer that the dungeon would like to commission the guild for a job. Examining the paper, Jiren asks skeptically if this is an official request from the dungeon master. The guild master suspects it's a trap. Usually, intelligent skeletons that can speak are killed on the spot. Kaido nods. Judging by the requirements, age and gender are irrelevant. They need strong adventurers willing to live on-site, with deep culinary knowledge and at least 3 years of experience. The dungeon is looking for cooks. Kaido adds that this is most likely for a bar and restaurant that are currently closed. He admits that while the dungeon is safe, he certainly wouldn't eat food prepared by monsters himself. Jiren points out that having a bar and a restaurant in a place like this is absurd. Kaido asks what's wrong. The conditions are good. The pay, 300,000 kraka, is generous. There's 1 day off a week, opportunities for career advancement, and the job seems comfortable. Kaido warns that the dungeon master might turn, and not just them. Jiren explodes, replying that he already knows that, and that's exactly why he's furious. He says there's nothing they can do about it. The only option left is to turn to Nagarara. He's walking down the road right now, grumbling about working in the dungeon. He recalls how he once beat up an aristocrat who dared to complain about the taste of the food Nagarara had prepared. That's how his shop went under, and the adventurer himself got mired in debt. That's when Jiren came to the rescue and took on his debts. So now Nagarara has no choice. He has to work in the dungeon, at least until he pays off his debts. However, the adventurer promises himself that as soon as he achieves his goal, he'll leave this place in a flash. Nagarara freezes in the doorway, his mouth agape. Adventuresses walk past him, raving about the bath. People sit, completely absorbed in the slot machines, paying no attention to anything else. Of course, rumors had reached Nagarara, but he still can't believe that this is really the underground. Glancing sideways at the guard, the adventurer snorts, remembering that the casino must have staff sent by the guild. Nagarara looks closely at the adventurer. His fighting spirit is red. There are 3 levels of this: beginner, yellow, intermediate, orange, and advanced. Red. Smiling, Nagarara thinks to himself with satisfaction that even though times have changed, true masters still remain. Nagarara approaches the guild guard, introduces himself, and asks if Jiren has notified them of his arrival. The guard recognizes him and asks him to wait a moment. He walks away. A skeleton approaches Nagarara and says they've been waiting for the adventurer. Nagarara decides that this is a puppet of the dungeon master. Nagarara asks if the monster wants to hire him, and he asks if the skeleton is indeed the dungeon master. The skeleton replies that he is. Nagarara remains silent. It's not easy for him, because he used to be a famous adventurer, and now he's being hired by a monster. The skeleton offers to take Nagarara to his workplace. He silently follows him. Nagarara is sure that the dungeon kitchen is as filthy as a garbage dump. He's outraged that Jiren sent him to work in such a place. The fact that he's being hired by a monster also infuriates Nagarara. He has no intention of working here. With these thoughts in mind, Nagarara grips his weapon more tightly. The skeleton points the way. Nagarara freezes, unable to believe his eyes. The kitchen is all sparkling and gleaming. The monster explains to the stunned adventurer that they have more than 10 magical stoves. There are also 4 huge ovens installed. The skeleton leads Nagarara to the pantry. He immediately feels the cold inside. He's heard of magical devices that create ice for food storage. However, such things are only found among aristocrats or major merchants. Picking a tomato at random from a crate, Nagarara realizes that all the produce is fresh. The skeleton asks if the adventurer is satisfied with everything, and he asks if he needs to buy any more equipment. With a bewildered chuckle, Nagarara replies that everything is fine. He admits that the equipment is excellent, but immediately asks how the skeleton plans to run things. The adventurer warns that he doesn't like people meddling in his affairs. The skeleton replies that the morning is already planned out, and everything else is up to Nagarara. The only condition, the food must be delicious and reasonably priced. Nagarara replies that that's exactly what will happen. He has no intention of ripping off his boss or undercutting prices. The adventurer doesn't cook bad food. The skeleton thanks him for his understanding. Nagarara reminds him that the monster said something about the morning and asks if there's a plan for breakfast. The skeleton replies that the plan is to set up a buffet-style meal. The adventurer is unfamiliar with that term. The monster explains that it's a kind of dining hall where visitors choose for themselves what and how much to take. Nagarara asks in disbelief and says that adventurers eat like there's no tomorrow, so at this rate, the dungeon will go bankrupt. The skeleton remarks that it's their job to satisfy the customer's desires. Nagarara recalls that in his youth, he was always hungry, just like his companions, who were starving to death. He wants at least the young adventurers to eat their fill. Nagarara warns that he won't sell at a loss. The skeleton says that breakfast will cost 1 silver coin or 1,000 kraka. The adventurer remarks that even if you can eat as much as you want, it's a bit pricey for a meal. The skeleton replies that breakfast will be free for hotel guests. Now, Nagarara understands what the plan is. The former adventurer shakes the monster's bony hand and says he agrees to work in the dungeon. The visitors look at flyers announcing that a casino hotel will soon open. Seal notices that more and more new things are appearing in the dungeon. Melinda exclaims indignantly that the monthly rent is too expensive. A single room is 90,000, and a triple room is 250,000, and that's assuming prices at Roadlock start at 50,000. After looking over the flyer, Kaido notices that the rooms are available for viewing. The skeleton recognizes him and greets him by name. The adventurer realizes that the monster remembers him. Smiling, Melinda remarks that Kaido doesn't seem happy about this. He shushes the girl and asks if they can take a look at the new hotel. The skeleton invites them to follow him. The adventurers carefully inspect the room, noting that it's not bad at all. Seal is surprised to see that the room has a sink and a stove, so they can make tea. Treff finds the bedroom quite decent as well. The skeleton explains that after signing the contract, cleaning is done once a day. He adds that valuables can be stored in the safe. Kaido gloomily thinks that even though the room is worth the money, they still can't afford it. Then he notices a breakfast voucher. The skeleton explains that breakfast will be served buffet style at the hotel and advises him to be sure to try it. Kaido asks what that means. The monster explains that guests choose what they want to eat themselves. A large table is set, and you can take whatever you like in any quantity. Gantz immediately asks if that means they can eat as much as they want. The skeleton says yes and describes the table. Several kinds of bread, egg dishes, meat, salads, fruit, soups, and juices. The adventurers' mouths are already watering. The monster adds that the quality will be the same as in their restaurant. Rumors are already circulating that the food is worth the money, and then some. Melinda asks if outsiders can come. The skeleton replies that in that case, the price is fixed at 1,000 kraka. Kaido thinks that even if everything described is true, the price is still a bit high. He wants to know what the others think. Gantz's thoughts are still entirely focused on meat. Kaido asks the skeleton if there are any rooms available, and the skeleton says yes. Soon, the adventurer is sitting at a table with a cup of tea. The inn is too cozy. The restaurant is open in the morning and evening, and the cafe is open during the day. Kaido wants to make this place his base instead of Roadlock. However, he'll still have to sell his loot from the dungeon and drop by the guild from time to time. Leaning back in his chair, Kaido realizes it would be nice if the inn also had a buyout counter. An unexpected idea strikes the adventurer, and he opens his eyes wide. He exclaims loudly, "Why not open one right here?" The other guests give Kaido disapproving looks, and he apologizes awkwardly. The adventurer sinks into thought. One shop won't be enough. We'll also need weapons and armor, and that's a whole workshop in itself, not to mention merchants. One redemption point, fine, but altogether it looks more like a miniature city. Clutching his head, Kaido wonders, why not open a guild branch? He decides to talk to his uncle. There's a knock at the door, and Madarame looks up. A skeleton enters the room, carrying Karama in the palm of his hand. Karama reports that he has prepared a report. The protagonist replies that there was no need to rush, and that he could have brought it the next day. Karima says he wanted to tell him something. The casino is running smoothly. Everyone is raving about the breakfasts, but they've already run out of prepared food. The protagonist is pleased. He replies that the food is standard fare, it doesn't cost much, and the time visitors spend here makes up for it. Karima adds that he congratulates Madarame. Madarame asks, "What's that for?" Karima reports that the net profit for the day has exceeded 10,000 points for the first time. The protagonist is happy, but wonders if that's good. Karima enthusiastically replies that it's an outstanding result. Only a handful have achieved such a profit in just 6 months. With a sigh, the protagonist remarks that this is most likely the limit. Already 70, or perhaps even 80% of Roadlock's adventurers have visited the casino. Of course, it's nice to talk about rapid growth, but a gradual decline will follow. 10,000 points a day amounts to just over 3.5 million a year. To earn 10 billion at this rate would take 3,000 years. Madarame laughs grimly. Karima reminds him that the protagonist is immortal as long as the dungeon's core remains intact. The protagonist replies that the casino won't last that long. People's tastes change, and imitators are bound to appear. Thinking it over, the protagonist realizes he needs at least 10 times as many customers, or better yet, 50 times as many. Meanwhile, in the Grand Hall, one of those present reports that a certain rookie dungeon master named Madarame is rapidly racking up points. Rumors are circulating that he's charging a hefty entrance fee. The listeners are outraged. Someone shouts that such actions contradict the very philosophy of the dungeons. With a sly smile, a woman present at the meeting says that during this time, Madarame hasn't killed a single person. Dogosgara retorts furiously that this is a disgrace. He cannot believe that such pathetic dungeon masters exist. It has been nearly a year since Madarame's arrival. A young woman sits on the throne, listening silently to those gathered. Finally, she extends her hand and orders an investigative committee to be convened, as well as Madarame himself to be summoned. A man walks quickly through the crowd. Those around him turn and, recognizing the newcomer, rush to greet him, throwing their arms around him and bombarding him with questions. His name is Jake. He has neatly styled blonde hair and an expensive, clearly custom-made red jacket. He is generous and has plenty of money. But how would all these people react if they found out that Jake is the master of the dungeon? Sometimes Madarame possesses a humanoid doll and comes to the casino. For him, it's not just entertainment, but also a rather useful way to pass the time. Here, the protagonist is greeted by a blonde woman. Turning to her, he greets the girl, calling her Alessandra. The protagonist remarks that she is, as always, irresistible. Laughing shyly, the girl replies that he is very straightforward. Madarame notices the new color of Alessandra's manicure and says it looks great on her. She is pleased with his reaction and proudly replies that she was finally able to get them. By interacting so directly with these adventurers, the protagonist manages to gather and analyze information and obtain up-to-date intelligence. Blushing, Alessandra invites Madarame to have dinner together. He replies that he likes the idea, but has already promised the same to Minchia. Fuming and enraged, Alessandra storms off, wondering what the protagonist sees in that girl. He takes a deep breath. Minchia is one of Madarame's temporary personas. He created her not out of some perverse desire, but to better understand women's needs. Sitting down at the bar, the protagonist orders the bartender to pour him a drink. However, the protagonist didn't come for a drink. He intends to gather information about this world. Madarame asks the bartender if she has anything interesting to share. Rumor has it that in this world, there is a huge abyss that leads straight to hell. There's also a tower, supposedly built by the gods, that reaches up to the heavens. And there's even a world tree the size of an entire mountain range. And they also say that a mythical war supposedly took place 1,000 years ago. Although the protagonist doesn't know whether to believe any of it. Madarame takes a sip. The bartender ponders what interesting story she could tell. She suggests a tale about the 8 great dungeons. The protagonist asks for more details with interest, and the girl begins. The so-called 8 are the 8 most famous and impenetrable dungeons in the world. There have always been daredevils who have challenged these places. However, rumors have now begun to circulate that the dungeons can be traversed. The protagonist asks in amazement. The bartender replies that there is talk of 4 people. The first of them is a swordsman named Sigurd, a man of monstrous strength. According to legend, at a palace tournament, he split a giant iron cannonball in 2 with a single blow. Now Sigurd has challenged the Black Dragon's dungeon. The second is a phantom assassin, Night Mist. No one has ever seen his face. The only proof of his existence is the severed heads of those he has hunted. Now the phantom assassin is storming the Dungeon of Blades. The third is the Mad Witch of Ash, Altair Vermillion, a genius of the magical city of Gundornoth. Everyone believed that spells of the 7th rank and higher could not be cast alone, yet Altair managed to do so at the age of 10. Now, the Mad Witch is conquering the Red Flame Dungeon. And finally, the fourth is a saint of the Salvation Association named Christiana. She is the first woman in a century to be recognized as a saint. Christiana possesses incredible healing powers. Rumors say that the saint is capable of restoring even lost limbs. Now Christiana has challenged the dungeon of the Heavenly Maiden. Noting the 8 and the 4 contenders to himself, Madarame replies that he understands. He thanks her for the story and asks her to pour him the best the bartender has. The girl asks if the protagonist knows about the divine sword Mione. Upon hearing that he does not, the bartender explains that no strong man can pull this blade from the stone. Only a hero recognized by the gods is capable of wielding this weapon. Madarame takes note of this. After the story, the protagonist spends another couple of hours drinking at the bar, listening to the tales of various adventurers. Most often, the conversation turned to the city being built above the casino. After the guild branch opened, things really took off. Soon, a small town will rise above the dungeon. Madarame returns to his room and lies down on the bed. He sheds his obsession and becomes himself again. The protagonist stretches with pleasure, noting that his own body feels more familiar. He finds it amusing that the idea to build a town came from the very same adventurer who was the first to enter the casino. The protagonist leaves the room, and noticing the girl, he calls out her name. Maria turns around. Madarame asks how things are going. She nods, and that answer satisfies the protagonist. Maria is a monster created by the protagonist. She's a zombie. Madarame reports that the clothes and cosmetics made by the maid are receiving high praise. He is pleased with the prize department. The protagonist adds that he wants to take a look at the next batch. Maria nods and leads the protagonist along. Madarame endowed the girl with both a mind and vocal cords, but she rarely spoke. Apparently, that's just her nature. Maria and the protagonist approach the prize section. The protagonist knocks and warns Melia and Alia that he's about to enter. He opens the door, and the girls turn to face him. Madarame created Melia and Alia because Maria alone wasn't enough. To avoid confusing the girls, he gave them different hairstyles. The protagonist notes that the manicure Melia did is hugely popular. The girl nods. The protagonist adds that Alia's clothes are also praised, but everyone likes them a bit too much. Madarame has already seen several people in identical outfits. He advises the girl to use different colors and details, even when wearing the same styles. She nods obediently. Although the girls don't show much emotion or react in different ways, they listen attentively. Madarame asks Maria to show the new samples. The girl displays the cosmetics. The protagonist asks whether the materials used contain any toxins. He receives an answer and realizes that everything has been taken care of. The protagonist has heard that poisons and minerals were used in cosmetics in the past. He realizes that if there are any cases of poisoning, the dungeon could be deemed dangerous and come under attack. As he leaves, Madarame asks if the girls need anything. He asks them to let him know immediately if they do. They respond in their usual style. The protagonist enters the room with the monitors. Karma greets him and informs him that they need to talk. The protagonist remarks that this sounds painfully formal. Karma congratulates Madarame on having been a dungeon master for a year now. Madarame can't believe so much time has passed. Karma says that in light of this, there's good news and bad news. The protagonist notes that this is the first time he's heard that phrase in person. Karma decides to start with the good news. He announces that, having held his title for a year, Madarame has earned the right to access the dungeon community. Noticing the protagonist's confusion, Karma explains that those who have lasted this long can establish a personal teleportation circle and visit it. The protagonist replies that he didn't even know such a thing existed. Karma explains that, according to the rules, they don't tell you about this until a year has passed, since too many masters die or fall victim to scammers. Madarame asks what one can do in the community. Karma explains that it's mainly for socializing and exchanging information, but you can also trade monsters for points there. With those points, you can even buy a plot of land in the community later. The protagonist realizes that in this case, he'll be able to open a second dungeon casino. Karma adds that you can also borrow points, but this is quite difficult since there will be a credit check and you'll need collateral, which will be the dungeon itself. If the debt goes into default, forced collection will begin. In this case, the dungeon is seized and converted into points. Madarame notes how ruthless the debt collectors are in this world. The conversion rate is 1/10 of the cost of creating the dungeon. Now the protagonist is seriously considering opening a second casino dungeon. In the worst-case scenario, he'll simply lose most of it. Karma adds that there is a risk for the lender as well. If the borrower's dungeon is captured, the debt will be impossible to collect. The protagonist realizes he'll have to act wisely. Karima announces that, considering the risks, the community is a good place for masters to interact. The protagonist replies that he understands and decides to set up a teleportation circle first. Madarame is already turning away, but Karima reminds him of the bad news. The monster informs him that the protagonist has received a summons. He is being called before an investigative committee. It seems Madarame has been reported over the management of the dungeon. The protagonist opens the envelope and reads the letter. Karima adds that the complaint was filed by 8 masters, the very same grade 8. The protagonist freezes with the letter in his hands at these words. These are the leaders, the rulers of all the masters. They govern the 8 great dungeons. The White Dragon dungeon has a total score of 220 million points. The Deadly Venom dungeon has 190 million points. The Black Dragon has 180 million points. Charm, like Desires, has 140 million points. The Heavenly Maiden has 120 million points. The Blades have 110 million points. And finally, the Scarlet Flame has 109 million points. Madarame notices that everyone has at least 100 million points and asks how many he has. Karima replies that he has about 4 million points. The protagonist wonders why the Great 8 decided to pick on him specifically when he has 100 times fewer points. Karima remains tense and silent. The protagonist realizes that everything about his dungeon is wrong. The most important thing is that not a single person has died here. Karima says there are many formal reasons, but the main one is daily income. The casino brings in an average of 10,000 points a day, and there are fewer than 50 masters with that kind of performance. Even White Silver's dungeon peaks at 300,000 points a day. Madarame realizes that to the others, he's a thorn in their side, and they prefer to get rid of people like him. He asks when the commission will take place. The answer is not comforting, tomorrow at noon. The protagonist asks if he can ignore the summons, but Karima says it is mandatory. The protagonist sighs. He doesn't even have time to prepare. If he goes in without a plan, they'll simply tear him apart. Taking the letter in his hands, Madarame calls Karima to come with him. They need to really put their heads together. On the way, the adventurer runs, gasping for breath. The same thought keeps pounding in his head. Everyone is dead. Tears stream from his eyes, and his breathing has turned into wheezing. His companions were a promising group of adventurers. Together, they had explored many dungeons. Eventually, the group made up their minds and challenged the Black Dragon. Everything was going well until the mid-level. The adventurers were already mocking the so-called Grade 8. But then their group was brutally wiped out in a single battle. Their opponent had a black aura. They say that the stronger the fighting spirit, the darker the color. Black is the limit. The adventurer hides under a tree from his pursuers. He can't imagine how to defeat these monsters. Monstrous creatures loom over the exhausted adventurer. He and his group shouldn't have even tried to fight the Grade 8. One swing from a monster, and the adventurer's head flies off his shoulders. Madarame holds a sheet of paper with a magical circle drawn on it. He's ready to go. Karima asks him to be careful. The protagonist activates the teleportation circle that will take him to the commission. The ground floor of the casino dungeon is ready. After stacking another pile of sheets, Kaido announces that he seems to be done. Melinda notes with satisfaction that everything has become clear with the construction of the guild branch. Almost a year has passed since the casino dungeon was discovered, and nothing critical has happened during that time. Sighing, Kaido regrets having blurted out so carelessly about building a guild branch. Melinda replies with a smile that his proposal has grown into the construction of a city, and the adventurer himself has been appointed in charge. Kaido adds wearily that he is almost in charge. No one wants to shoulder the entire burden alone. Because of the division of rights, even the merchants have come forward to claim their share, arguing that a guild monopoly is unacceptable. The situation is getting more and more tense. Melinda compliments Kaido and hands him a cup of tea. She says she put in extra sugar. He thanks her and takes a sip with relish. The adventurer suggests that Melinda join him for dinner once things have settled down. The girl adds mischievously that it's only if he's picking up the tab. Kaido laughs and agrees. The adventurer is truly grateful to Melinda. They decided to disband Kaido's group because of his assignment. Asel was worried and asked what would happen to them. Treff tried to calm her down, saying that Kaido would have a hard time too. Gantz agreed with her, but added that it was hard for him to make such a decision too. Melinda quietly said she understood how they felt. She noted that her comrades were surely worried, and about their income as well. The girl reported that she had spoken with the guildmaster. Melinda turned to Asel, Seal, Treff, and Gantz and announced that she had managed to arrange for them to be accepted into the dungeon guard. They were stunned, as this was a very prestigious position. Melinda replied that she had told Jiren that since he was disbanding their group, he should provide them with such work. Seal asked what the adventurer herself would do. Melinda cheerfully replied that someone would have to help Kaido. He thanked the girl, only to embarrass her. Just then, Dan bursts into the room shouting. Kaido asks what happened and offers the breathless guard some tea. Breathing heavily, he reported that trouble had occurred in the dungeon. Kaido, instantly alarmed, asks, "Have there really been changes again?" Madarame finds himself in the central hall. With a smirk, he recognizes the Grade 8. Someone announces the start of the investigative commission and demands that the accused state his name. The protagonist recognizes the speaker, as he has basic information about these leaders. Before him stands the head of the Grade 8, the ruler of the White Silver Dungeon, named Sylvana. She orders the accused to state his name once more. The protagonist asks whom she is addressing. Upon receiving the reply that she is addressing him, Madarame retorts, noting that he is under no obligation to speak, since he is not a criminal. One of the leaders explodes, demanding that the protagonist watch his tongue. He adds that they were the Great 8 even before he was born. Another leader notes that the protagonist has enough audacity to go around. Madarame recognizes the third leader as Dogosgara from the Black Dragon Dungeon, and the second as Maguire for the poisonous insects. The protagonist remarks aloud that the commission investigates guilt, not passes judgment. Soju from the Dungeon of Desires joins the conversation. Without taking her eyes off her reflection, she says she can't stand upstarts who've forgotten their place. Annie from the Dungeon of Enchantment takes a bite out of her pastry. With her mouth full, she explains that the very fact of being summoned to the commission already implies guilt. Madarame asks with a smile, "What exactly is it?" He adds that he follows all the rules of the dungeon. Sylvana cuts him off sharply, ordering him to stop joking. She says that the price for opening the doors already distorts the very essence of the dungeon. Yurin from the Heavenly Maiden Dungeon smiles slyly, hiding behind her fan. She notes that the protagonist hasn't killed anyone yet. Jude from the Deadly Blades Dungeon exclaims indignantly that this is a disgrace. Karen from the Scarlet Flame Dungeon agrees with him. With a snort, Madarame replies that there is no rule stating that killing people is mandatory. Sylvana states that the Great 8 would not tolerate such a thing. Snorting, the protagonist remarks that he doesn't need their approval. Dogosgara explodes, his eyes blazing, and he shouts that he'll finish off the arrogant youngster. Everyone else watches the scene closely, some with grim expressions, others with smiles. Madarame is mentally terrified, but in front of the Grade 8, he calmly adjusts his clothes and admits that he is the weakest among those gathered. However, the protagonist reminds them that the Dungeon Master is immortal as long as the core remains intact. Maguire retorts that it is very naive to think so. He notes that they could simply lock the protagonist away in this place forever. Sylvana listens to him in silence. Madarame, still smiling, replies that they are free to do as they please. The protagonist adds that it is foolish to assume he came here in person. Yurin calls him a naive child and says that they had anticipated this. She explains that the barrier on the railing seals off the mind. That way, the spirit will never return to its body. Breaking into a smile, Yurin adds that Madarame is now the Great 8's plaything, and they'll have plenty of fun with his mind using magic. She licks her lips, anticipating how the protagonist will sing after this. Yurin asks the protagonist not to worry, since they'll take good care of him. He listens to her in silence, showing no particular interest. Karen says that Yurin won't have to get involved, and Jude agrees, adding that they'll handle everything themselves. Laughing, Madarame apologizes for spoiling the fun and explains that his consciousness isn't in this body, since he had anticipated such an outcome. Pointing at himself, the protagonist explains that he controls his current form using a magical artifact. His mind, meanwhile, is in his main body. Dogosgara shouts that the protagonist is a pathetic coward who sent a puppet in his place. Smiling, Madarame replies that such a statement sounds amusing coming from those who decided to overwhelm a newcomer with numbers. He adds that he is willing to ease the restrictions on opening the doors if the Great 8 accepts his terms. Dogosgara is already fuming with rage. Sylvana orders him to calm down and decides to listen to the protagonist. The protagonist notes the woman's composure. So far, everything is going according to plan, and moving forward, Madarame is counting on pure luck. The protagonist states that the condition is simple. The Grade 8's dungeons must be connected to the casino dungeon via portal. The leaders freeze in bewilderment, and a flustered Dogosgara asks if this is even possible. The protagonist nods confidently, explaining that the community itself is one big dungeon. The principle with the casino dungeon will be the same, only the consent of both parties will be required. Maguire, adjusting his glasses, declares that this is nonsense. Although the idea is amusing, he doesn't understand why they do this specifically with the casino dungeon. Maguire points out that Madarame is negotiating with the Grade 8, and he's no match for them. The leader of the venomous insects dungeon adds that contracts must be signed to form an alliance, but the masters don't trust the protagonist. Maguire concludes that deals aren't made with people like that. Smiling calmly, the protagonist notes that this is true. Without trust, negotiations are impossible. Madarame offers another solution. He will put the core of his dungeon on the line. Everyone freezes in astonishment. Even Sylvana loses her composure. Dogosgara asks if the protagonist realizes what he's actually saying. The protagonist fully understands that he is, in effect, staking his life. Madarame explains aloud that if anyone breaks the agreement, will pay penalty points. The protagonist himself, in such a case, will forfeit all his points. Sylvana remains silent. Even by a stretch, Madarame has fewer than 10 million points. If the agreement is broken, he will die, but it will cost the Grade 8 almost nothing. The protagonist asks what Sylvana has decided. Madarame adds that if even this option doesn't suit her, he is ready to back down. However, Sylvana, ignoring Dogosgar's protests, agrees. She asks where Madarame plans to place the portal and hopes he won't set it up near the core. The protagonist replies that he plans to choose a spot near the entrance. Sylvana asks if he'll ease the conditions for access to the inner chambers in return. The protagonist nods and promises to lower the price from 200,000 to 100,000. He recalls how he and Karima had planned to lower the price to 1,000, and were certain the Grade 8 would definitely take the bait. Dogosgar demands that Madarame make passage free. The protagonist smiles tensely, cursing the leader under his breath. Clearing his throat, he says that's impossible, since the passage is a key strategic point in the dungeon. Sylvana, once again ignoring Dogosgara, agrees to accept the protagonist's terms. Maguire notes that the casino dungeon will be seized as soon as the terms are relaxed. Ignoring him, Madarame asks if the meeting is over now that all topics have been discussed. Sylvana declares the meeting adjourned. A large crowd has gathered at the entrance to the casino dungeon. Kaido pushes his way through the crowd. Seal informs him that a huge passage has appeared near the entrance. Kaido asks anxiously if anyone has been hurt and if the guild master has been notified yet. Asel reports that Gantz and Treff are already inside, and a fast messenger has been sent to Jiren. Kaido nods and orders that no one else be allowed inside. Passing through the opening, the adventurer is surprised to find a room. Calling out to Gantz, Kaido asks if everything is okay. Treff points out something on the floor to the adventurer. Kaido decides it's a complex magic circle, but Melinda explains that it's a portal. Gantz says he tried to activate it. Kaido interrupts, asking if it leads deeper into the dungeon. Gantz starts to answer, but doesn't get to finish. The portal suddenly begins to glow, and unfamiliar people appear in the drawing. One of the newcomers asks who Kaido and his companions are. He realizes that these people aren't from Roadblock, and their aura is much stronger than that of his squad. The newcomers look around in confusion. Kaido explains that this is an underground casino. The stranger asks again, clarifying, "Is this the White Silver dungeon?" Kaido doesn't understand. More and more people emerge from the passageways, convinced they are in different dungeons. Some believe they're in the Black Dragon, others in the Heavenly Maiden, and still others in the Poisonous Insects. Melinda starts to say something, but Kaido already figures it out. All 8 rooms with portals are connected to the Great 8's dungeons. He laughs nervously, realizing that building a branch is out of the question. What's needed now is someone to take control of this chaos. And that someone is Kaido. The adventurer steps forward and asks everyone to listen to him. Meanwhile, Karima gives Madarame some excellent news. Yesterday's revenue exceeded 200,000 points, and the same result is expected today. These figures exceed the protagonist's expectations. It's been only 3 weeks since the dungeons were connected, and daily revenue has increased 20-fold. Karima is impressed by the protagonist. He not only weathered the commission with fortitude, but also pulled off such a clever move. Madarame prefers to call it a contract, though he admits that the benefit ultimately goes to him. The players brought the best adventurers with them, and degenerate gambling began. The restaurant also attracted quite a few visitors. Karima notes that once rumors about access to the 8 spread, adventurers will flock to the casino from all over the world. Madarame replies that this will mean more work. At the very least, they'll have to expand the casino, or else there won't be enough room for everyone. Maria also reported that the prize department can no longer keep up. The protagonist orders them to increase the number of copy machines and assign 2 skeletons to each one. Karima happily notes that no one is even thinking about saving up coins to open doors anymore, especially after the price drop. That's the true power of the casino dungeon. Madarame notes that their dungeon is now the center of city life. As long as there's no clear threat, neither the guild nor the merchants will allow the casino to be taken over. The eight couldn't even have imagined such a thing. However, Karma points out that there is a problem. Developing a new item will require a lot of points. Madarame stares thoughtfully at the monitor, where a skeleton is shielding itself. The protagonist says that profit is the most important thing right now. Karma asks if they shouldn't be saving money right now. The protagonist agrees, but admits that spending is necessary at this time. Right now, the dungeon casino is thriving, but after joining the Grade 8, there are only two questions. Will Madarame hold out? And who will fall first? From this moment on, the real hell will begin. In the white silver dungeon, a skeleton with a sword and shield makes its way through. A huge snake slithers about there, and a dragon flies. Deep in the dungeon sits Sylvana, and she's drinking tea. Remembering Madarame, she clicks her tongue in annoyance. Sylvana realizes that the idea of creating a door that won't open while exploiting others' enthusiasm is truly clever. She tried to replicate this strategy, but to no avail. Sylvana thinks it must be the conditions. Such a door needs to be installed on the first level, and the conditions for obtaining the key must be secured in advance. Adjutant Krimt enters the room with letters. Calling out to the lady, he remarks that Madarame has gone down the wrong path, and his dungeon relies entirely on tricks and loopholes in the rules. Sylvana, who follows the true path, has no reason to fear the main character. She remains silent, thinking that it is precisely because Madarame chose the wrong path that he is so dangerous. Too many adventurers have already perished in Sylvana's dungeon. If she installs a door like that now, it will raise a lot of suspicion. The dungeon can be expanded, but shrinking it is forbidden. Sylvana faces certain ruin if, with such expenses, she is left without a steady influx of points. Because of this, only newly minted dungeon masters can follow Madarame's path. However, they won't be able to join the community until a year has passed. By that point, the survivors have usually already built colossal dungeons. A drop of sweat trickles down Sylvana's forehead. It turns out that only one person will master Madarame's trick, Madarame himself. Such is the cheat-like model of dungeon management. Wanting to comfort his mistress, Krimt notes that while the connection of the dungeons did help the protagonist, Sylvana's income has also doubled. She replies irritably that that is exactly what infuriates her. The aide nervously apologizes, but Sylvana cuts him off. The dungeon master changes the subject to the letters. Krimt explains that some masters in these letters are asking to connect the dungeons. Sylvana sighs because this isn't the first time. And one of the letters, as the aide reports, is from Madarame. Sylvana demands to read it. Krimt opens the envelope, schemes the text, and snorts in disbelief. Sylvana immediately asks what's written there. The aide notes that the rogue protagonist is complaining about his problems. The protagonist is bombarded daily with requests for a meeting from all sorts of dungeon masters. Sylvana remarks that this is hardly surprising. Only top-tier masters ask the Great Eight for such favors. For lesser ones, it would be the height of audacity. But they can certainly turn to Madarame, since he's a newcomer. Krimt continues reading. Because of these requests, the protagonist proposes creating a governing committee under the auspices of the Great Eight and formalizing the terms of contracts and penalties for breach. With a surprised chuckle, Sylvana notes that this is an unexpectedly sound idea, although she really doesn't want to bother with new laws. However, leaving everything as it is isn't a solution either. Sylvana notes that the lower ranks benefit more from the alliance, and therefore the higher-ups might start demanding tribute. Krimt asks in surprise, is the dungeon leader really going to defend the lower-ranking members? Sylvana shakes her head, explaining that she doesn't care about them. The real danger lies in the redistribution of points, as this could destabilize the top eight. Krimt nods, fully understanding his mistress. Rondimio and Gargantua, who occupy 9th and 10th places in the rankings, are the most troubling. They seem submissive, but what they're really thinking is unknown. Sylvana sighs, thinking about the new laws. She doesn't really like Madarame's idea. However, she asks if the protagonist wants to join the committee. Krimt checks the letter and replies in the negative. He adds smugly that the protagonist seems to know his place. This surprises Sylvana. Madarame struck her as insolent, and she has no intention of letting her guard down. Sylvana considers breaking the alliance, isolating the protagonist, and destroying him. However, she dismisses the idea. The alliance is clearly beneficial, which means there will certainly be those who oppose giving up the profits. Sylvana wonders if there's a way to strike at Madarame while still preserving the benefits. She remembers the law, and her eyes flash. Sylvana demands that the flustered Krimt write a reply. Smiling, she notes that Madarame hasn't thought of everything. Sylvana orders the Great Eight to be summoned, based on the fourth of the 6 laws of the dungeon, to introduce new rules. There are 6 laws of the dungeon. The first is that the master must build the dungeon. The second is that the dungeon must be passable. The third is that the master must follow the rules of the dungeon. The fourth is that the rules are inviolable, but masters from ranks 1 through 10 may propose amendments if supported by a majority. Fifth, new rules must be fair to all masters. Finally, sixth, new rules must not contradict the old ones. The Great Eight gathered in the central hall. Everyone exchanges silent glances. Maguire glances at Sylvana's empty seat. He wonders what she has in mind. Most often, rules are changed to get rid of a rival. Judging by the expressions on the other masters' faces, they knew nothing about this in advance. Maguire realizes that in this case, Sylvana's target isn't a specific person, but everyone at once. Although it could be someone who isn't even in the room, Madarame. Sylvana enters the hall, apologizing for being late as she goes. Dogosgara asks irritably, why did she gather everyone here? Sylvana replies that the topic is the connection of the dungeons. Maguire asks what rules she intends to propose. Sylvana waves a stack of papers and announces that she has been refining the project until the very last moment and has decided to settle on this version. She gives each leader a copy, and they delve into reading the rules for connecting dungeons. The first rule states that connections are permitted only through portals. The second rule states that the portal must be on the same level as the entrance. The third rule states that there must be a clear path from the entrance to the portal. The fourth rule states that when connecting, the lower-ranked master pays points to the higher-ranked one. The amount of the payment is determined by agreement between both parties and the commission. If the dungeons are already connected, the amount is determined through negotiation. If there is no agreement, the decision rests with the commission. The fifth rule is that the connection may only be terminated by mutual agreement. Sixth, in the event of a unilateral termination, penalty points are paid, the amount of which is determined by the commission. Seventh, the committee consists of the top 8 masters in the rankings. After finishing reading, Maguire remarks that the points listed are indeed worth including in the rules. Dogosgara asks in bewilderment, what's so good about these laws? Maguire says that points 1 through 3 are obvious. The following rules are much more important. The committee, that is the Big 8, is granted enormous authority. But the most important thing is the continuation of the fourth point. If the dungeon is already connected, the commission can set any fee. Dogosgara still doesn't understand and points out that there are practically no such places anyway. Smiling, Maguire replies that in fact, there is exactly one dungeon. Dogosgara's eyes light up when he realizes they're talking about Madarame. Currently, the protagonist dungeon earns about 250,000 points a day. Each commission member will take 40,000 from him, meaning he'll remain in the red. Thus, the protagonist will simply go under in 6 months. Annie asks what will happen if Madarame proposes to terminate the partnership. Maguire replies that they'll then impose a penalty the protagonist won't be able to afford. While the protagonist might somehow scrape together $1 million, he definitely won't be able to raise $100 million. The decision, in accordance with the rules, was made unanimously. Deep within the white-silver dungeon, Krimt approaches Sylvana, who is resting. He congratulates her on the successful meeting and the unanimous adoption of the new rules. She nods listlessly. Something still troubles Sylvana. Madarame continues to pay regularly, even though it must not be easy for him. Sylvana doesn't understand how he manages it. She has a bad feeling. A saddened Karima informs the protagonist that a bill has arrived from the Grade 8 for 320,000 points. With a wave of his hand, the protagonist briefly replies that they should pay it. Karima says that although they still have points left in their reserves, if things continue this way, they won't last even 6 months. Madarame suggests cutting expenses. He also plans to use the extreme method of exchanging coins for points, but with a commission to prevent mass exchanges. Karima is willing to take charge of the calculations, but he still asks anxiously if the dungeon can hold out like this. Madarame replies thoughtfully that they need to attract more customers, and recalls how they handled such situations in Las Vegas. He decides to organize a boxing match. Flyers inviting people to the battle champion are posted on the walls. Melinda tells Kaido that she has compiled a list of participants. He thanks her and asks if Mason has agreed. Melinda nods, adding that he's burning with impatience. Dan, hearing this, is thrilled. Mason is an adventurer from Roadlock. He's nearly 6 feet tall and has incredible stamina. They say Mason is unbeatable in hand-to-hand combat. Dan says they now have a chance. Kaido nods, adding that they really want to win the first competition. Battle Champion is a hand-to-hand combat tournament organized by the Dungeon Ad. The rules are very simple. One-on-one matches, no weapons. The winner receives the title of first champion, as well as a substantial prize to boot. Leaning back in his chair, Kaido remarks that it was quite bold to hand over the entire organization to the guild. Melinda replies that everything is under control, since the priests have already given their consent. She adds with a sigh that the first thing the dungeon master demanded was to provide medical care for the fighters. Jiren could clearly learn a thing or two from him. Dan notes that the dungeon master is incredibly generous, since he gave the guild the rights to bet on the winner. Melinda admits that she's worried about security. After exchanging coins, people have started lingering in the casino. Dan agrees with her, adding that the new player's eyes look downright creepy. It's a scary situation. Kaido wonders what the dungeon master is thinking at all. Does he really want to save lives? Or does he just not want to be seen as a threat? What's his true goal? What's going on behind the scenes? Why do dungeon masters even create dungeons? Melinda looks at Kaido, who is deep in thought with surprise. The tournament begins. People watch the match excitedly, cheering for the participants. Someone shouts that he'll kill the fighter himself if he loses, since he's bet his last money on his victory. The current battle is being broadcast on the monitor, but Madarame isn't watching it. He's playing chess with Karama. The monster is just making its move. The protagonist looks thoughtfully at the board. He says with a smile that he taught Karama how to play himself, but now he wins less and less often. Embarrassed, the monster replies that the protagonist is being too modest. Madarame studies the board. The situation is critical, and he considers giving up. However, the protagonist realizes there is still a chance. He picks up a piece, deciding to go all in. A panicked Dogoscara bursts into the room where Sylvana is. Ignoring everyone else, he begs for help. He asks Sylvana and Maguire to lend him some monsters. The White Silver leader asks, "Is the Warlord's dungeon really on the verge of being overrun?" Maguire can't believe it. Dogoscara admits that the adventurers arrived too early and the defenses can't hold. With his eyes wide, he shouts that Madarame is to blame for everything. To be continued. Thanks for watching. Write your feedback in the comments. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. See you soon.